Lesson 27, the book of beginnings, slave to ruler. We've been talking about Joseph. We started talking about Joseph, 37th chapter, then laid off on the 38th chapter, and back on Joseph on the 39th chapter. And the rest of the book of Genesis pretty much talks about Joseph and what goes on with his life and what happens with him. So, God, let's, if there's the thing right here plugs into this, if you don't plug it in there, this thing doesn't work. There you go. That's magic. Genesis 39:1. Now Joseph had been taken to Egypt. An Egyptian named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and a captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites and had brought him there. Who had brought him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, serving in the household of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord made everything he did successful. So if you notice what it's saying there, it says the Lord is the one that made him successful, and even his master, who was an Egyptian, not a Hebrew, could see that he was being successful because of something outside of himself, but he knew enough to let him handle all of his affairs, which was smart. But it said the Lord was the one that was doing this for him. There's a couple of names used here in the book of Genesis that's the name God, that we have God or Lord. And this is a quote. Of the primary names for God in the Torah, the Lord, YHVH, which is tetragrammaton, Adonai, and God, Elohim, the Lord, connotes the more personal aspect of God, while Elohim connotes the universal God, the Creator. The Lord is used here and throughout most of this chapter because God is involved in the personal looking after Joseph. So when you're reading through the book of Genesis, if you notice when it says God, when it says Lord, four names that are Hebrew names that are used for God, four basic ones. There's others that are descriptions as well. Is YHVH, which it said is called the tetragrammaton. No vowels, you'll notice, is the Lord. Elohim is God. El is God, or Mighty One, and Adonai is Lord. Why do we have Adonai? Where did it come from? I think I wrote it down here in just a minute. Let's look at this. Exodus 20, verse 7, in the King James Version, it says, "Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain." Holman Christian Standard says, "Do not misuse the name of the Lord your God." The Expanded Bible says, "You must not use the name of the Lord your God thoughtlessly. Lift up the name of the Lord your God in vain." And in Leviticus 19:12, one of the Ten Commandments, "You must not swear falsely by my name, profaning the name of your God. I am Yahweh." And we grew up reading King James. It says, "You shall not take the Lord's name in vain." What does that mean?
Not to use it without being thoughtful of the reason you're using it.
But what do most people think that commandment is talking about? Cussing. What we call cussing. But that's not what that's talking about. You can use the Lord's name, and I like the Holman Christian Standard Version says, "Do not misuse the name of the Lord your God." That's more correct, as far as I'm concerned, than it is taking the Lord's name in vain, because as a kid growing up, I didn't know what in the world vain was. I just knew you weren't supposed to do that, and I knew that was cussing. That's all I knew. And that's what most of us knew growing up. But it means more than that. So part of the reason, and this is a quote here also, Jewish history follows the same pattern as the life of Joseph. Before I get into this, let me back up again. Adonai. The name Adonai came about because, my understanding, is because of that commandment. It says not take the Lord's name in vain or not misuse the Lord's name. So the Hebrews, as they were writing these things, if you're reading something that's written by a Jewish author, and he says God, and it has God in there, a lot of time he'll have capital G, a space, and then D. Then let me put the O in there. And they were so concerned about taking the Lord's name in vain or misusing his name that they wouldn't say his name. And some people say that's the reason we don't know what YHVH, that's the reason we don't know how to pronounce it. And people say it's Yahweh, people say it's Jehovah. We really don't know. I don't know. And there's nobody that knows because they didn't write it down. The vowel pointers were not put in the Hebrew language until like the 10th century. The Masoretes, when they were the Masoretic text that you read, when you see MT, many times it means Masoretic text. And they're the ones that put the markers in to let us know what the vowels kind of sounded like. Until then, we had no idea about the Hebrew language. But because they were afraid to use the name wrong, they wouldn't use it at all. So that's where the name Adonai came from, Lord. So they use Adonai, and it'd take a while to get through why they came up with Adonai. But just so you know, when you run across that name, Adonai, that's one of the reasons why. Now this, that quote here, Jewish history follows the same pattern as the life of Joseph. Persecution. The moment they are emancipated, they achieve social and professional success. Then they are subjugated again and given another chance. They rise again. Like Joseph, the Jewish people have been remarkably successful in foreign societies. What would lead them to be successful in this way? Now I'll tell you what a particular Jewish rabbi said, and then the one at the bottom is what I put on there. But he said this. He said, strong and stable families, near universal literacy, delayed gratification, and aversion to violence. What I think is more the correct reason is the last one, a covenant relationship with God. God made a covenant with Abraham, and that's what the Jewish people came out of. Because of this covenant relationship, they are successful even when they don't realize why, as far as I'm concerned. Because when God makes a promise, does he change his mind? He doesn't change his mind. Winston Churchill, this is a quote of his, we owe to the Jews a system of ethics which, even if it were separated from the supernatural, would be incomparably the most precious possession of mankind, worth, in fact, the fruits of all wisdom and learning put together. On that system, by that faith, there has been built out of the wreck of the Roman Empire the who of our existing civilization. So even Winston Churchill, a Brit, realized that it was through the Jewish people, the Jewish nation, the Jewish bloodline, that civilization became what we wouldn't have a Christian faith if it wasn't for the Jews. And they wind up being successful when a lot of other people don't. 0.2% of the world's population is Jewish. Forbes 200, 19% of them are Jewish. The 200 wealthiest people in the world, 19% of them are Jewish. Almost 1 out of 5 are Jewish. And think about it, 0.2% of the world's population, and they have their little country there in the Middle East, and people around them don't want them. Not even that one little piece of land. Strange. So now let's get back to where we are. There's a parallel between the Jewish people and the life of Joseph, is what I'm getting at. Verse 3. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord made everything he did successful. He saw the Lord was with him and everything he did was successful. It's smart in business. Their managers and even business owners are afraid for people under them that work for them to get too far advanced in their position and learned their job too good because it would threaten their job. What I always learned as manager of different businesses and so on is the smarter and better the people are beneath you, the better off you are. The less I have to work, the more I would tell them when I would go on vacation, I said, if you need me while I'm on vacation, write me a letter. Don't call me, just write me a letter. If you don't know your job good enough to do them while I'm gone, you don't need to be here. But he understood, Potiphar here, he understood that Joseph was being blessed because of his God, and he took advantage of that. Verse 4. Joseph found favor in his master's sight and became his personal attendant. Potiphar also put him in charge of his household and placed all that he owned under his authority. That's trusting somebody pretty good. From the time that he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house because of Joseph, and the Lord's blessing was on all that he owned in his house and in his fields. He left all that he owned under Joseph's authority. He did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. He didn't pay any attention to anything except to feed himself. Joseph took care of everything else. And I put a comment down there. If you'll notice the same thing, Laban noticed the same thing when it came to Jacob. Laban didn't have that much until Jacob came there and started living with him and taking care of his flocks. Then his flocks started growing. He became a wealthy man because of Jacob. Well, Potiphar became more and more successful because of Joseph. It's because they were blessed. To give you an idea of I like to picture things. This is a NASA photo here. You can see where the Red Sea comes up through here and so on. This is where Joseph was, around Hebron, around that area, and he traveled up to here to Dothan to his brothers, and that's where his brothers sold him into slavery. Look how far they carried him all the way over to where Potiphar and Pharaoh is. That's over 200 miles that he was carried in captivity. Would you be ticked off at your brothers by this time? By the time you got there? Joseph was a better man than me. This is the same thing, except it's drawn out so that you can see a little better. Jerusalem wasn't in existence at that day, but Hebron down here is where he came from, and Dothan is where he was sold into slavery, and then he would travel all the way through here, through where Gaza is today, all the way over to Zoan or Tanis, depending on, it's known by both names. Pretty long trip. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. After some time his master's wife looked longingly at Joseph and said, "Sleep with me." Joseph is between 17 and 30 years old. Do you think that was tempting to him? 17 years old, a teenager, in his late teens, maybe early 20s, because he was there for many years after that. 17 to 30 years old, and she comes and says, "Sleep with me." If he's thinking, I read these articles, I see these news reports of female teachers who have sexually abused 14, 15-year-old boys. Well, the boys didn't turn them in. And so what I'm saying is boys and girls are built different. Did you all know that? There's a difference in men and women. If it was not for you ladies, there would be no civilized society. Society would not have lasted this long if it hadn't been for the influence that you ladies have introduced into this world. I can tell you that for sure. So anyway, pardon me? So, the offer that was made to Joseph was not something a 17-year-old would easily refuse. Not just on a sensual level, but the fact that she owned him. If you're owner, you think if Potiphar owns him, then she owns him too. She comes to him and says, "Sleep with me." That puts double pressure on him. What's he going to do? How do you turn that down? I said the latter becomes evident in just a little while. This is something that you might not care about, but I like these ladies. Trope. You ever heard of a trope? I'm going to tell you what it is. Trope is the term for the notation system for chanting the Torah. So in other words, if I was presenting the way they do the Torah, they chant the Torah or they sing the Torah. So what I would do tonight is I would sing the scripture to you. I'm not going to do that. But because they chant the Torah, they have to have things marked so that they can understand how to chant this particular part of the Torah. Refused here is marked by the longest musical note in the trope. When chanted, if it was in English, would read refused. In other words, he refused. He turned it down flat. There was no doubt about it. He meant business. Partially because of his refusal and other things as well, they attached the title righteous to Joseph. Now think about this. Rabbi Shmuel Golden, this is his quote, "Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as well as Sarah and Rebekah, received direct messages from God." And you can read that in the book Genesis. "None of Jacob's sons received direct messages from God, yet Joseph again and again made reference to God and honored God before others." How did he know to worship God? Dad must have told him, somebody told him, but he had a pretty solid faith at this particular time. He had been sold by his brothers. They were going to kill him. They had thrown him in a hole with no water, no food. All I can say is, the brothers, if it was me, the brothers had better look out when I got to where I could. They'd be in bad shape. But here, though he hasn't spoken to God directly from what we can see, nowhere does it say that in the book of Genesis. And we don't see any indication where he did it all, but he knew of God and he worshiped God and he honored God. But he refused. "Look," he said to his master's wife, "with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in his house, and he has put all that he owns under my authority. No one in this house is greater than I am. He has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife." It's like keep in mind, you're his wife. So how could I do such, and look how he phrases this. "So how could I do such a great evil and sin against God?" Now, where would he get the idea? There was no 10 Commandments. There was no law written or anything else. But he didn't say, I might sin against my master. I might sin against nature. I might sin against mankind. He said, I might sin against God. He saw this. If he committed a sin, he was sinning against God. Joseph gave 3 reasons why he would not sleep with her. It would be ungrateful of him to betray his master. She was the wife of another man. And it would be a sin against God. Any sin that we commit is sinning against God. I could commit I could commit a sin against Kevin. And that would be considered, I'd be committing a sin against God. Joseph understood this back before Jesus was ever even thought of, before anybody knew there was going to be a Messiah, before there's any predictions of a Messiah, before there's any thing to read, prophecies or anything else about Jesus coming along. He understood the fact that any sin that he committed would be sinning against God. Reference to God, mentioned earlier, Elohim instead of the Lord, YHVH Adonai, is the only time this rendering is used. Why? Who told Joseph that adultery is a sin? It had been easy for him to just believe that it wasn't. What would have been the easiest thing for him to do? To acquiesce to what she was asking? You notice nowhere in there did he say, I am afraid of your husband Potiphar. I'm afraid that he would kill me. What would they do back then if a man caught you committing adultery with his wife? He didn't. We'll get to it in just a second. For what Joseph was accused of, the death penalty was what would have happened. Okay. Verse 10. Although she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her. Now, she kept continuing over and over again. Now one day he went into the house to do his work. I think I'd have gotten me an office outside in the barn somewhere. So he wasn't very smart on that part. Now, of course, that might have made Potiphar suspicious too. Now, one day he went into the house to do his work, and none of the household servants were there. She grabbed him by his garment and said, "Sleep with me." But leaving his garment in her hand, he escaped and ran outside. When she saw that he had left his garment with her and ran outside, 14, she called the household servants. Look what she did. She called the household servants. You all know this story. Said, "Look," she said to them. Now look who she blames for this situation. My husband. She's blaming her husband. My husband brought a Hebrew man in. And notice she had to make an emphasis. A Hebrew man, this foreigner, this lowlife. My husband has brought this. His fault. Anything that's happened is his fault. But she brought him in here. He brought him in here to make fools of us. He came to me so he could sleep with me, and I screamed as loud as I could. She's really building one up here, isn't she? I screamed as loud as I could. When he heard me screaming for help, he left his garment with me and ran outside. He ran outside. I mean, she'd be a good novelist. Verse 16. She put Joseph's garment beside her until his master came home. In other words, she didn't say her husband came home. His master, emphasizing that. Then she told him the same story. The Hebrew slave you brought to us came to make a fool of me. But when I screamed for help, he left his garment with me and ran outside. He ran outside. She said, "Sleep with me." And now in verse 17, she's kind of changed a little bit to make a fool of me. You know, law enforcement, what they'll do when they question somebody, they get them to tell them the same story over and over again, because if somebody's lying, they'll change something. If you're telling the truth always sounds the same. A lie, you can make it up sound any way you want to. Verse 19. When his master heard the story, his wife told him, "These are the things your slave did to me." He was furious. Who was he furious at? Doesn't say. He might have been suspicious of his wife. But he was furious. He couldn't blame her. And had him thrown into prison. So this is getting back to where a list about the punishment down here. Had him thrown into prison instead of having him killed, where the king's prisoners were confined. So Joseph was there in prison. We don't know if he was furious at his wife. We don't know if he even believed it. But if she tells this tale, and she's told this tale to the servants, what else can he do? Verse 21. But the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him. He granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. The warden put all the prisoners who were in prison under Joseph's authority, and he was responsible for everything that was done there. The warden did not bother with anything under Joseph's authority because the Lord was with him, and the Lord made everything that he did successful. I read these, I happened to run across another article today, and it was it's talking about, quote, prosperity preachers. Well, some of the people that it named are people that I like, and they're not prosperity preachers. They're what they would call prosperity preachers, and most of the time when people refer to a preacher by that particular title, they've never heard that particular preacher. So I hear people all the time with, say, Joel Osteen, since he's so well known. I hear them talking about how terrible Joel Osteen is. I said, you ever heard any of his messages? No. You ever read any of his books? No. I'm not taking up for Joel Osteen. I'm just saying I'm not going to criticize, my philosophy and my that I will not criticize another preacher, another church. That's not. We just tell the truth. That's all we have to do. But what was happening here? Because of his relationship with God, he was prospering. You can call it a prosperity gospel. You can call it whatever you want. And are there preachers that take this too far and go in directions they shouldn't go? Yes. I will not name which ones I think do that. I'm not going to say which churches it is or anything else. But there's an element of truth to this. What we said last, given it shall be given unto you, full measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over shall men give into your bosom. That's what Jesus said. Give and it shall be given unto you. That's a promise. Whatsoever things you desire, when you pray, believe you receive them, you shall have them. If you had faith that a grain of mustard seed, you can say this mountain, be cast into the sea, and it would obey you. Well, are those things true or not? So, if you become a Christian and put your faith in Jesus so that you'll be blessed and you'll make money and you'll have lands, then you're doing it for the wrong reason, and I doubt your sincerity. But if you believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, there are blessings that you will have on you, just like there are blessings here because of Joseph. Because of what he believed, because of his covenant relationship with God, he received blessings. It says, the warden did not bother with anything under Joseph's authority because the Lord was with him, and the Lord made everything that he did successful. Joseph became successful because of his relationship with God. Questions, comments, concerns, problems, or complaints?